Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Bulletproof Selling. My name is Sean Rhodes. I'm the Chief Sales Sergeant here at Bulletproof Selling and author of the book Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. If you haven't got my background yet, I was blessed and honored to be able to travel the world with some of the highest performing troops, studying how they were able to stay alive. And now I help sales teams stay alive in their sales, in their pipelines. Now, here at Bulletproof Selling, we believe above all else that hope is not a sales strategy. And so we are here to bring the lessons of the battlefield into business so that we can increase the performance of your salespeople, of your pipelines, and of course, the results that you're getting out of your teams. Now, in this Bulletproof Selling series, it's an interview series. I reach out into my network and into the network of my network to find those who are best-selling authors, trainers, consultants, and those who are actually out there in the field managing sales teams and managing their own pipelines, people that aren't hoping that they close business, but rather basing their business on systems, on strategy, on planning. And my commitment is that of every one of these episodes, we will build a sales system, which we've been able to do, I think, more than 70 times, so that you can actually increase your business and reach your goals. Now, it's a rare thing when you get to meet someone who actually positively transitioned out of the military and into sales, because sales is something that most people would think the military does not help you prepare for at all. You're in there every day doing what you're told, showing up on time where you're told to be. It's very structured, it's very systemized, but it doesn't teach you how do you actually then get out of the box and innovate and capture solutions for the civilian market. And that's why when I find a veteran who's actually out there managing teams, managing sales, managing an enterprise level account, I say, I have to learn from this person, because even though I get to talk to salespeople all day, every day, thousands of them each year, when I get to meet somebody that brings that unique experience of being in the military, having served in combat, and then coming into the world of sales, I know I'm going to learn something. And above all else, big secret for all my listeners, I learn just as much from my guests as you probably do, if not more. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome to the show, Mr. George Hamilton. George, welcome to Bulletproof Selling.
Sean, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, my pleasure, sir. So we got to talk a little bit before the show, but I'd love for you to share with our guests, brief overview, top line of your history in the military, where you got to go, the cool things that you got to do, and then, oddly enough, how you found your way into sales, because that's not something that most veterans end up doing. So please walk us through your journey and kind of what that took you on the path of.
Yeah, absolutely. So spent about 10 years in the active army as an artillery officer. Did my fair share of time in Iraq and Afghanistan, about 3 years total. And then, did some oddball things working for Army Test and Evaluation Command and things of that nature. And it was a moment in time when I was up in northern Alaska testing some equipment for the Army that I decided maybe in negative 62 degrees, I wanted to try something different.
A little cold up there, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. I think I had found my limits. So anyway, I left. I joined Business America, and oddly enough, it was another veteran ultimately that gave me a chance. His name's Brandon Cates, and he's currently the CEO of Amatrain. Was a small supply chain startup called Innovel Solutions. We had known each other through kind of me running that veteran hiring program right out of the service. Had talked and I had invited him to a conference out in DC, at which point I took him to lunch. I said, hey, I really want to talk about coming to work for you. I love this concept of Innovel. He said, that's funny. I'm here because I want to talk to you about coming to work for me. So with no experience whatsoever here about 8 years ago of any kind, he pulled me in to be his director of business development.
Wow, that's Innovel a lot of trust.
So kind of jumping into the deep end of the pool, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then from there, I've kind of moved through some various supply chain organizations. I'm currently working for Flexe, Flexe. It's a Seattle-based company that does programmatic logistics and more tech-enabled with a warehouse management system that's in the cloud that provides agility, short-term type programs for companies looking to augment their supply chains and provide better service to their customers.
So in a short amount of time, you moved from not knowing anything about sales to now managing these larger accounts. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. One of the first accounts that I sold and managed was Electrolux, and then right behind that was Amazon.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And
Very good. That's a heck of a transition. So I'm curious to know then, because I meet a lot of veterans and they're interested to get into sales. there's a lot of trepidation because sales is one of those career fields where you kind of have to invent it as you go, which is the opposite of the way we did it in the military. Whether you're in artillery, whether you're in the infantry, whether you're a scout sniper platoon, there are hundreds of years of lessons learned that are transferred to you so that you can make it home from your mission, so that you can be more successful. So what was the biggest surprise for you coming into sales, being, the chief of business development, and you've never sold anything in your life? Walk me through biggest surprise for you coming from the military into that role.
I think it was the biggest surprise. There were a lot of them, for the record, but I think the biggest surprise was the way in which the sales environment works. Right, it has a tendency to be extremely unstructured, and there's a lot of people that when you're working with an enterprise level customer, right, they will analyze you to death as a solution before they ever agree to spend money with you.
Yeah.
And to me, I think where I struggled, Sean, honestly, was it was, hey, this is extremely logical to me. It makes perfect sense to me. We've proofed out all the numbers. I'm not really sure why we're still talking about it.
Right.
Right.
Why don't you make a decision, man? Come on.
I think that analysis paralysis was the biggest shock to me.
Sure.
In the interest of candor. And it took me a while to but understand how to manage through that, or why companies do that. And it's not necessarily the end of the world.
So we talked about then the biggest surprise for you coming from the military into sales. Now, curious to know, because I do run into quite a few veterans that are in the field of sales that are very successful. What do you feel like transferred from your experience in the military and on the battlefield into the field of sales? I mean, obviously, this is a constantly changing environment. You had to get very used to that. A lot of ambiguity. You just touched on that. So we have to kind of navigate and figure out each mission. We have to define kind of a new set of criteria. Even if it's the same mission we're executing every day, the battlefield changes. So curious to know for you, what were the things that did transfer well from the battlefield of combat into the battlefield of business?
Yeah, I think one of the big things, and you kind of outlined this at the outset of your talk here, is the military is extremely structured. Right. There's a lot of like right time, right place, right uniform. That's 90% of the battle, all that good stuff.
Yep.
I think one of the things, though, that gets lost in some of those military stereotypes is there's an immense amount of flexibility when it comes to the mission. Right. And what I did in Kandahar and Baghdad and Basra, there was a mission, there was a way of doing that. But ultimately, if that didn't work, I mean, it immediately transitioned to like, hey, that didn't work. Like, anybody else got a good idea?
Yeah.
And running from there. So that flexibility, that willingness to not get too married to a plan, not get too married to a concept. I always like to say that I'm married to a plan just in so long as it works. The minute it stops working, I'm done with it. Right. So there's that. The second component, I think, is the U.S. military does a pretty exceptional job, especially in its leadership ranks. And, I'm still in the reserves. I'm a deputy commander for a brigade now. It teaching you how to manage relationships. I think that the military may not get enough credit for that. It gets a lot of credit for leadership development and all those things, right? But I've gone from, in my military career, from having to teach, coach, mentor brand new lieutenants that are coming out of their officer basic, all the way to dealing with a warlord in southern Afghanistan and trying to get him to do what I need him to do. Productively. So I think that ability to solve problems on the fly and that ability to really relate to and manage relationships with people are probably the two biggest things.
And that's something you touched on is something I get to share from stages all over the world and share with organizations, which is that this idea of the systems we have in the military forcing people into lockstep is, like you said, just isn't true. What we discovered with salespeople, and you can, I'm sure, back me up on this, and with the military, is that the more systems that we have, the more it actually allows us to innovate. Because you think of like all of the moving pieces, because I was able to embed in a couple artillery units on the Marine Corps side. There are a ton of moving pieces. You're dealing with these massive cannons. I'm sure there's a more technical term, but that's what we call them. And there's a lot that could go wrong in loading a shell and making sure that it's dialed in correctly and getting that shell downrange on target. You had to do all of that in an environment where you're likely, dealing with a sandstorm. There's a lot of flak coming from, one radio channel and another. You're dealing with people that are stressed. They probably haven't had sleep in a while. If we didn't have systems, all of those minute changes would add up to mission failure. And so that's why I know your people were so well trained and you were as an officer to lead them. And that if there's lack of sleep, there's a bunch of stuff going on around you. You still have to be able to run through that specific set of steps to get that round on range, to get it into the gun and out the door, so to speak. So with sales, same thing. If we don't have systems in place that tell us, managing pipeline, that tell us about all the things we need to learn from that next prospect conversation, to tell us what that quoting process looks like, we're going to have to invent it on the fly every time. And the phone is still going to be ringing, and the boss is still going to be wondering when we're going to meet our numbers. And the customers that we already have are going to be still calling and complaining about things going wrong. So without systems, it all tends to fall apart. So I'm going to ask you a question that I ask every one of my guests. So I'm curious to get your response on this, because you've gotten now in your years to run into a lot of salespeople, a lot of customers, a lot of prospects. Where do you feel like salespeople, from what you've seen, are relying on hope, probably more than they should, in how they sell?
I think they are, to a large degree. I think it's what I have found is there's two things, pardon me, that I think are really important. The systems that you've touched on are a really big deal, right? But that your systems are really touch points. It's tracking your pipeline, like you said, making sure you understand who your points of contact are inside an organization, what levels of influence they have, what levels of control, making sure you have a very firm grip and understanding and a system of what that problem is you're solving for the customer, building that framework in a way that it's a common framework for everybody to understand that. The other side of that too, I think, is not just those systems that track kind of those quantitative things, but I think it's also making sure that your people are well trained. There's an old military saying that says, when the moment arrives, you will not rise to the moment, you will rise to the level of your training.
Yeah.
And I am a firm believer in that. So when you're working with a sales organization, you get a very broad spectrum of experience and talent in most sales organizations. And I think things like pitch training and objection handling and all that good stuff should be consistent trainings. It shouldn't be, hey, we trained you once during onboarding and good luck the rest of the way, right? It's, hey, you've been trained before, but the way that I work it on my team, and I have some very, very smart people who run the details on this. I get to show up and do the fun part.
Yeah.
But we do it consistently. It's monthly, right? This month we're going to talk about our pitch. How are we pitching, right? We don't want it to be scripted and robotic and all that. We want to give you some guidelines on how you tell a story. And next month we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about objection handling. What are the top 6 objections in our business that we tend to see? How do we handle those objections, right? Again, we don't want it scripted and robotic. We want it to be, here's kind of some guideposts, and you tell your story inside of that.
I absolutely love that you're updating this each month on a new topic. So it actually, a chapter in our book, Bulletproof Selling, the analogy we gave is when we went into Iraq in 2003, it was how fast we could get to Baghdad. And I'm sure you remember back in those days. Were you in the military back in 2003, by the way?
Not 03. I commissioned.
Not 03. Okay, so I was a little bit before your time, which is rare because I'm a young dude and I'm like, man, I finally got somebody beat, because I always talk to these guys. I was back in 1975 and we were in the NAM, So finally, I meet somebody that might be a little younger than me. All right, cool. So anyway, back to the story. So 2003, it was a rush to get to Baghdad. We were in these open top Humvees that still had like cloth on them, which doesn't do a good job of stopping bullets. We realized real quick, bringing these things back in 2004, when our mission set had changed, because the environment had changed. No longer is it how fast we can get to Baghdad. We were on neighborhood patrols, and we had to up armor our Humvees. Well, in the Marine Corps, you probably got this in the Army a lot too. We just had to piece it together because the supply chain would never catch up as fast as the environment would change with us. So we were, literally like welding plates onto the sides of our Humvees. That lasted a while until the IED started getting bigger. And then we started having to, bring in MRAPs in these vehicles that could actually withstand what we were dealing with out there in the neighborhood. So same thing with what you talked about with training and sales. Is that I could train you today, but 3 years later, the entire environment's probably shifted. And the objections that I taught you how to deal with 3 years ago during onboarding have likely evolved, updated, because the market's going to change, inflation's going to change, supply chain challenges are going to change. So if I'm not really visiting with you on a regular basis as a team and giving you the latest and the greatest and what we're seeing change out there on the battle space, then we're setting you up for failure. So I think what I'd love to do with you, George, is actually build a system for how we know what to train our salespeople in next, because it sounds like you have that pretty dialed in. As far as, we're going to deal with objections this month, and next month is going to be something else. So when we talk about building systems here at Bulletproof Selling, we're actually trimming hope away from our sales strategy. So we use this acronym TRIM, TRIM. And the T in TRIM is the trigger. So just like in the military, when that request for fire would come in on the radio, and you knew that now I have to execute that request for fire system, all the things that have to be done to make sure that this thing is going to happen without injuring any of my people and getting rounds on target. Like that's the trigger for that particular mission set. But with sales, especially as it applies to making sure I'm giving my people the most up-to-date training possible to prepare them for success, given that I could be training them on 1,000 things. When should I begin this system for planning my next training session? What's the trigger element? Is when I notice things that aren't performing really up to par with my team. I'm noticing a lot of sales getting shut down for the same reason. Quotes aren't being accepted, so I'm losing sales and conversion. When is the trigger element for me to look at what do I need to train my people in next?
So I'm gonna make a bold statement here.
Hit it.
I think the trigger is yesterday.
Okay, I got you.
Okay, and the reason I say that is I think we generally in business America, and I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole here, do a very poor job across the board of training and development. That has been my observation in the 8 or 9 years I've been out of the military, and I think yesterday's the answer.
Okay.
I think more in the model you're talking about, the system you're talking about. I think you have to assess your team, assess what you're chasing, your pipeline, like what's your portfolio, how are your numbers looking, right? And I think you can make that trigger can come one of two ways. It's either, hey, I'm way behind and I'm nowhere near my numbers, and there's probably a reason for this, assuming that your business model is sound, right? And that kind of should trigger you to get in and say, hey guys, where are you struggling? Like where in the funnel are we just failing to close? Mm-hmm. Like where are we losing people in the funnel? And maybe it is that first set of objections, Sean, where folks are losing them or whatever. But that's my point. Like, hey, if you're not meeting your numbers, you're struggling, there's something going on somewhere in the funnel there. Like that should be a trigger to say, okay, I got to figure out what I should be training on. If you're doing exceptionally well as a sales organization, I think the trigger then becomes like, hey, I'm doing really, really well, and I'm one bad day away from not doing really, really well. Yeah. So where are the weak spots in my pitch? Where are the weak spots in my sales process, right? Where am I losing dollars that I should be converting? So if you're having a rough go of it, I think the answer is, why am I having a rough go of it? And that should trigger you. If you're doing exceptionally well, I think the trigger should be like, I'm maybe doing a little too good here. Like, where are my gaps?
Gotcha. So that I don't have that bad day. And that I think is something so critical. I totally agree with you that most sales teams don't take the time to do this. Corporate doesn't take the time to do this. If they have a great year, they're meeting numbers or exceeding numbers, big celebration, pop the champagne, let's all go out drinking. But in the military, you and I both know if our mission pulled off flawlessly, we would still take the time to assess it. Like, why did it happen that well? Was everybody well rested? Did we have exceptional communication? Were the coordinates finally read to me the right way? So the guys out in the field figured out how to actually call them in correctly, whatever it might be, right?
There's an old Murphy's Law, right? When your attack's going too well, you're in an ambush.
Yes, exactly.
And
you're being drawn in.
It's and for me, maybe it's a little bit of paranoia, right, from previous experiences. And I was a fire supporter for most of my career and a company commander and things like that. So I spent a lot of time out in the street, and it was always like, this may be going a little bit too well. Like I'm not real, this worries me a bit. So I think the trigger part of that is look at your business and ask yourself one of two questions. I'm struggling. Why am I struggling? And I'm taking this in a vacuum outside of, hey, we have a business model problem, a cash flow problem, whatever that is. Why is my sales team struggling? And training, I found 9 times out of 10 solves a lot of struggles.
Absolutely.
Hey, we're doing really, really well. But again, is this an ambush? Like what should we be looking at to ensure that we're doing well next year too? We're not doing well
before
5 minutes
it hits us in the face, which it very likely could. So we've got the trigger element, which is great. Now I want to move into the R piece of this, which is making this repeatable. So I've determined in the trigger where my gaps might be, which tells me the training that I likely need to conduct. But now I need maybe 5-7 steps that allow me to kind of pull this off the shelf. Because again, I got a lot going on as a sales leader, or even as an individual. I could run this program all by myself if I'm a solo operator and I don't have an engaged leadership team. Still figure out where's my gap, what do I need to train myself in. So what are the steps that I need to execute in building this training, identifying where I can find the resources, and in executing the training? What are those 5 to 7 things that you would run your team through to determine, now that I've identified what it is, scripting, or conversation flow, or determining who the decision maker is, whatever that is, where I'm getting stuck, or I need help, or I need to improve. What are those 5 to 7 things I'm doing to identify resources, execute training, and making sure that training sticks?
Yeah, so I think like a step action drill in the field artillery or a battle card, right? That's what we're talking about here. I think it's, step one is always, what are you trying to accomplish here? What's your, to borrow a military term, what is the terminal learning objective for this thing? Like, what are we trying to accomplish? Very clearly identifying the problem you're attempting to solve or the action you're attempting to take is always step one in my mind. I think we do that very poorly in business America too. We kind of, we half-ass that, and then we're surprised when we get bad results. So identify the problem, identify what it is you're really attempting to do. And in the training realm, I think it is important to say, hey, here's the terminal learning objective of this training. So this training, we are going to do pitch, right? We're going to work on our pitch. We're going to work on objection handling. We're going to work on proposal writing. We're going to work on whatever that thing is. Very clearly identify it. And then, have a training that walks you through what this is, why this matters, how we're going to apply it, some guidelines, right? And then basically in conclusion, like, hey, what it is, why it matters, how we're going to apply it. And then basically that cheat sheet, if you will, that allows you to go do that. So for our guys, when you look at our pitch training, our guys and gals, there's a little card that basically is like, hey, here's the 4 components to a good pitch, right? Here's the problem. Here's kind of a story. Here's an example. Here's a proof. And you've got this little set of guidelines in front of you. And we don't want you to read verbatim, but we'll go through like a writing exercise and say, okay, write it out, write your pitch out. So having a structured training that you're referring to in terms of what is my terminal learning objective? What am I trying to accomplish here? Why am I trying to accomplish that? And how am I going to apply this to my day-to-day work is how I tackle those things.
Awesome. And of course, it's actually applying it being the final step, whatever that looks like. I know sometimes it would be read me back your writing prompts. Let's critique that as a group or as a leader. And then you actually have to go out there and use the thing. Because I need to know if my training's effective. So always last step in training is, demo and then demo do, right? In the military, we use that term a lot as well. I'm going to show you how to do it. I'm going to watch you do it with you, walk you through it. And then I'm just going to let you off on your own and see how you perform, all in a controlled environment. So a sale is not necessarily lost if I really understand at the tail end. No, you really didn't hear a thing that I said.
Right.
Don't give your people that.
I'll tell you, we do that, John. So it's, we have call it a group session. I'm going to use our pitch training because we redid that recently to make sure everybody was kind of up to speed. Like we did it as a group, right? And what we did is we walked everybody through the elements of a good pitch. We had our chief growth officer. He recorded his pitch, right? We had him kind of watch that. And then we had the writing exercise and we did that. And then everybody had to come back into the room very awkwardly and they had 90 seconds to pitch to their teammates, right?
Yep.
I said, all right, now you got this. And in the interim, we're still doing target calls, right? So I as a new boss, I've been in this job for about 7 weeks now, said, okay, hey, just invite me to those target calls. Doesn't mean I have to run my mouth on them, but sometimes having that extra senior director title helps, right? We all know in sales, there's your actual title and then the title you give the world.
Yeah.
Titles matter, right? So I would sit in on some of those calls and I'd contribute where they got stuck and jump in, right? To your point. So we're not losing revenue opportunities there, but giving them good opportunity and exposure to do that. So that was kind of thing one. And then we did that about 30 days ago. And then this month, what we're doing is we are doing one-on-one sessions. Myself, my market enablement representative, she puts together that training, helps facilitate it. And then one-to-one with each of my teammates this month, I'm taking 45 minutes and walking through their pitches. And then next month, we're all going to get together as a team. We're going to do this thing live. We're going to do it in big mock scenarios and go from there. And in conjunction with that, we're layering in objection handling, proposal writing, right? But the consistent reinforcement of a skill set and training, not only through the content that you're giving them and the guidance that you're giving them, but the consistency in what you're engaging are what makes that take.
Love it. So the trim part of this is really underway now. I love it. We got the trigger, we got making it repeatable. Now the ion trim is making this thing improvable. We figured out in the military that as soon as we learned something about our enemy or our high value targets and how we were pursuing them, the high value target in their intelligence network learned it pretty quickly too.
Right.
We only had to
And
execute it once for them to realize
both ways,
yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. Tracers do work both ways. So they would adjust and we would have to adjust. So it was a constant game of who can adjust the fastest in order to, actually achieve their mission. So in this system we're building for training, then you've already touched on it a little bit in that the eye in improving. So what am I going to do to assess this to determine how do I make it better next time? And you've already mentioned, with your pitch scripting and this training process you've got, we laid it out in a very simple format. So if it was your first day on the job, you could probably learn a lot. But the next month, we're not just going to repeat the same thing over and over again. We're going to take it up a level. It's going to be more, one-on-one with your sales account manager. The month after that, you're going to have to go through it in an even greater fashion, an even more evolved term. So how do you make sure that you're improving the training that you're delivering, whether it's a month over month, same topic, or taking a look at, did that scripting training work? Do I need to change it slightly next time because we realized we really missed a valuable opportunity somewhere along the way?
So we do that two ways. And it's really just, it's very militaristic in fashion. We do that through what you'd call, just an AAR. They're a little more informal. I don't run an AAR maybe the same way I did, as
I'll bet
company
not.
commander. There's no sand table or anything on
Right,
this,
right.
So just a good AAR when you're talking to folks, right, and touching base with the team. I'm a big believer, Sean, in consistent informal communication. I think that people are inundated with emails and surveys and all kinds of other garbage like that, right? Like just talk to your people for crying out loud. Ask them what they liked and what they didn't like. And then it's up to you to write that down. And, what's the old pros and cons list or however you want to structure that. So that's one way I do it. The other way is Allie Knox, who's my marketing person. She's absolutely fantastic in real time. As we're going through a lot of these trainings, she's keeping notes, she's keeping thoughts, right? And she's coming back to me as a marketer who is much better at outward facing communication than I am and saying, hey, here's our problems. Like this didn't go great. Or, maybe we had a training with an individual and the first individual, and this happened to me this week, one on Monday, got it. They really connected with the material. They understood what was happening. The one on Tuesday apparently didn't absorb anything from the initial training, right? Well, our first question there, Sean, to your point of improving should not be like, hey man, is this guy not that smart? Or is it, my first question is always I didn't communicate this clearly enough. Right. So it's opportunities for improvement that to me are just continuous, right? There's formal, you're writing it down, you're improving your scripts, you're improving your trainings. There's informal where you're talking to people individually because maybe person A needs you to teach them in a specific way and person B needs it completely differently. Did that answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're looking at were they able to implement it? Because you're dealing with training, but you're dealing with individuals that you are training. And that's something that a lot of people lose when they think about the military, that we're giving it all to everybody one way and you either get it or you don't. When really at the tactical level, good leaders know how each person really is going to learn best and how they best, actually use it to become muscle memory. For some people, that might be verbal. For some people, you could talk to them all day, but until they get their hands in the clay or they get their hands on that weapon system, they're never going to get it. I can say I was like that. You could show me diagrams of an M60 all day, but until I got in there and started playing with it and jamming the thing up, I never quite understood how it worked. So we've got the trigger element, repeatable, making it improvable. Now, this final piece is measurable. Now, I always say when I'm building sales systems for people, and how do we measure it, right? Because we're investing time in doing something differently with our training. It's going to take time away from us as leaders. It's going to take time away from our people when they could be out there selling. So I have to justify the mental and emotional and physical energy it takes to do something differently, which is measuring. Is this thing getting us better results? Because if not, set it on fire, trash it, go back to the way you were doing things. But if it is getting us better results, how do I know that? What am I measuring to see, is my training actually working? And it's probably not just gross sales, because that's too easy in our world. I want to know about some leading indicators, especially if I have a longer sales cycle like I'd imagine you do. Maybe it's 3, 6, 12, 18 months. The training that I put in today may not yield results for a while. So what are the leading indicators that I can measure to know I conducted this training, either a single session or month over month? How do I measure it to see if it's actually working?
Well, one, you always start with the concept of what gets measured is what gets done, right? So what's important to your organization? I think that's thing one. I agree with you. I think gross sales it's too easy of a metric, right? And I think it's important to break down. So I'll break down my team and the things we care about. Okay, we are managing a multitude of warehouse partners to create a open source warehouse network marketplace that anybody can come in and use, leveraging our software platform, right? So to me, there's a revenue component because I'm going to find those warehouses in response to what our commercial team, where I came from, well, we're all a commercial team, but the account management team I came from is bringing in on the shipper side. Gross revenue matters, but maybe not in my world very much. What matters in my world is what is the diversity of operator that I'm bringing in? What are their capabilities, right? Are they meeting the target capabilities that I need? And I don't want to bore your audience here, but are they food grade operators? Can they handle hazmat? Are they industrial and manufacturing experts? Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Is the diversity of my network getting healthier? I measure that. So it's not just the gross number of operators for me within my network. It's the diversity of those operators geographically, capability wise, and then looking at, hey, how much revenue do I have? Like, hey, I've got 500 warehouse operators in my network. That sounds amazing. But, oh, by the way, I do 90% of my revenue with 40 of them.
So you're really talking about like
It's
territory management, then making sure that you do have a diverse set of territory, even if you're reaching out across the nation or the world, you've got the mix of people that are really going to make a healthy pipeline.
Exactly. Right. Okay. So it's, and if you've noticed, nothing I've mentioned so far has anything to do with gross revenue,
right?
Or a gross number of accounts. Right. So we focus very heavily on like, who are the target operators we really want to work with that we're trying to get pulled into the fold? What does our network health and diversity look like, and so on and so forth. So I think if you look at the diversity and performance of your program and kind of block out the gross numbers for 2 seconds, you'll start to get better measurements of how things are really going.
And of course, we started with that trigger element. We actually identified like where in our pipeline are we getting stalled, or we're doing great, but where do we recognize our weak points? And we could obviously reach back into that number and say, did that thing improve? Did we get better pipeline velocity in that one stuck area? Or did we notice that in that weak area? Now that's one of our strengths. And of course, we know in the military, if we're measuring ourselves against 5 things, you mentioned it already, we're only going to perform consistently to the level of the lowest ranking thing. Whether it's physical fitness or time on target or accuracy or whatever it is, it's always going to be consistently at that lowest level. So that always gives us another opportunity then to measure on for the next training session, take a look fresh at the pipeline, at the weak areas, and make sure that we're moving forward there. So I want to make sure that people do have time, George, to go out and actually use this. I'm excited about it because now it gives me a way to train myself better. So for all those out there, we've got this whole sales system in place for how you can identify where you need training in and go out there and find the resources, execute it, improve it, and of course, measure it. But I want to make sure that people know how to get a hold of you because obviously you're a wealth of knowledge in transferring everything you learned in the military into sales. How do we find out more about you, your organization, and get deeper into George's world?
I mean, obviously you can find me on LinkedIn. It's just George Hamilton. Just kind of the same ugly mug may actually be the same ball cap in my photo.
Maybe.
So LinkedIn obviously, and then our organization again is Flexe, FLEXE.com.
Awesome,
that's probably the best place to find out more about us. And in the vein of veterans, our CEO is a former Navy man himself. I don't give him a ton of grief for that, just on Army Navy days. But we got quite a few veterans in our organization. So flex.com, feel free to find me on LinkedIn. And for any of your audience that wants to punish themselves by talking to me further, they're certainly welcome to reach out.
I think they'd have a lot to learn from you, sir. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your insight with us today. And for us here at Bulletproof Selling, make sure you're following us on LinkedIn and on our YouTube channel where all of these live streams are archived. We have more than 70 now. Brilliant people we've been able to meet with. George, you're definitely in the top number of them just from what we've been able to learn just from training. That's been beautiful. And of course, for the podcast that we produce out of all these, maybe you're catching us via a podcast channel. We are on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere that podcasts can be found. So for more sales systems to help you replace hope with certainty in your pipeline and your performance as a salesperson or as a team, make sure you're checking out the resources that we update each and every week over at bulletproof-selling.com. Well, Sean Rhodes here. It's been a pleasure serving the sales community alongside you, George. Let's get out there and make selling bulletproof.
Thank you, Sean.